All right, let's get started. Do we have recording on? I guess we do. So, welcome everybody. Some of you know me, some of you don't. As you can see from the t-shirt, hopefully you know the movie reference, Pulp Fiction. You can consider me your personal Mr. Wolf. Not gonna repeat the whole introduction I already gave on one of the Discord channels, but really about all things internal operational excellence, how to build and run studios effectively, and and what that means is that if there's any issues that you have in terms of how you run your operations to build the game and collaborate as a team, it's areas that I can help. I will not be helping you with product or marketing or any external facing aspects. There's other coaches for that. Most of you have already booked your 1 hour one-on-one session with me and your teams, so we will be meeting in those and continuing this conversation. In those sessions, I'm happy to answer any questions and help you in any way I can, but I do want to understand how you do your short-term planning right now, and maybe I can comment on that. I know some of you are also interested in long-term planning, but I think in general you have to learn how to walk before you can run. And today we are talking about how to walk, which is how do you short-term plan and how do you get your team working effectively and efficiently, because that's the foundation that you can then build realistic long-term planning around. Of course, if some teams already feel very comfortable with the short-term planning and they want to jump straight into long-term planning, then we can talk about that in smaller sessions with you. I don't know how the system works, but I assume that you talk to the GameCity people if you want more sessions than 1 hour with me and beg for more of my time, and then they'll graciously pay me to spend more good quality time with you. But let's get started. So today's main topic is short-term agile project management. If somebody wants to manage waterfall, we're not going to talk about that today, but I do recommend anybody working on games to use some form of agile development. We will also a little bit discuss project management in general, the very basics of it, why do we do it, and that sort of stuff. I will be shifting to my slides shortly, so I won't be seeing the Discord screen. I'm running a very poor one-screen setup here in my temporary home office, so I will be pausing every now and then and coming back to Discord. So if you have a question, just raise your hand and we'll take breaks to answering the questions. In terms of time, I know the official time is an hour. I can maybe stay 15-20 minutes over that, but not more than that to continue answering questions in the end. I have more slides that we will be able to cover, so we will cover the basics, and I have additional material that we can then jump into in the questions part or in our one-on-ones later. Let's get started. So welcome everybody. All right. So short-term agile. But first, what is project management? What is it? Why do we need it? Why is it so hard to do? In general, I think this is an underappreciated field in the game industry. We're very focused on the product management side and developing and just getting stuff done. But then we get frustrated when we are delayed and we go over budget and we struggle to keep the project under control. So this is all what we're doing. But what is it? We can look at dictionary definitions. We can look at Wikipedia. What does it mean? Note, we do not want to confuse this with product management. That's a completely different thing. And I'm not here to talk about product management today. But if we put out all of that together, scope and time and cost and all of this, lots of different definitions. But if I look at the key concepts, what is project management to me? It's stakeholder management. It is finding the purpose, defining the goals, dealing with the constraints of scope, time, cost, and quality, coordinating a group of people, which ultimately form team or teams, and then the tools and processes we use to do that. We need some sort of structured methodology or framework to do this. Otherwise, it turns into chaos when we add more people, especially when we work remotely. And there's three different aspects of this. There's the project management, the product management, and the general operations. And so my expertise, I have done product management as well, but my expertise are more on the project and operational management. So we'll focus on those. But before we get to the meat of the stuff, let's talk a little bit about stakeholder management, because I think this is underappreciated thing in many teams. And early in my career, I fell into this trap as well. We're just very focused on realistic plans and trying to get the team efficient, but we were ignoring the stakeholders. But in fact, the number one success factor for your project is your stakeholder management. Whether those stakeholders are your investors, your CEO and other business leaders in a larger organization, a program like GameCity, whoever is sort of a stakeholder in your project, you need to make sure that you manage them well, or otherwise they become a problem rather than a benefit to you. Now, if you piss off your investors, you're not going to raise more money from them, and they're going to start throwing all sorts of blockage in your way. If you're not working well with the GameCity program, then you're not taking the full advantage that the program can provide. So make sure you manage your stakeholders. And remember that customer is always right, even when they are wrong. So usually the guy paying the bills is always right in the end. And trying to argue against them, you're just going to lose potentially your job. So where do we start? We start by identifying the stakeholders. Well, stakeholder is anybody who will be impacted by your project, which includes ultimately the players and the paying customers. It might include the publisher. It might include a license holder, whoever is investors, VCs, GameCity, all of this. So you want to really list them down and figure out who they are. But remember that the number one stakeholder is the one paying the bills. So you always want to make sure that you are taking care of the people who are giving you money to do the stuff that you do. Whether that's investment money or government grants or whatever. You want to keep the stakeholders happy, even when it's wherever that money comes from. And you start with, what do they care about? Usually the people who give you money, they care about stuff like, when is it ready? How much does it cost? How much profit does it make? And these might be hard questions to answer. But project management can at least help you over time start answering the questions of how much do we believe it costs and when do we believe it's ready. The profit side is more about product management and analytics and that sort of stuff. Many of you might have seen this. This is the classic project management triangle. Time, cost, quality. Pick two to focus on. Do you want to get it done quickly? Well, then, it's going to increase your costs or lower your quality or both. If you want high quality, well, then it's going to take a long time and cost a lot. And so it's about trying to do trade-offs. Personally, I don't find this a very valuable tool, managing my stakeholders, because I've never found a stakeholder who could really prioritize these things. And where is scope, right? For many stakeholders, it's very difficult to distinguish between quality and scope. The quality that you, as a game designer or an artist or a programmer, think quality is very different than what a stakeholder quality is. But the scope is even harder. And one of my CEOs said, there's a quality all of its own in scope. And so I like to use this. We've probably all played around with this in the kindergarten or on the playground, and we know how it works, right? But in project management terms, I call it the project management seesaw. I'm sure I didn't invent it. I'm sure I got it from somewhere, but I'm getting older, and that was so long ago that I don't remember where I got this idea from. But instead of using that triangle, use this and put the people and the time, i.e. your resources, who's doing the work and how much time they have to do it on one side, and then the scope and quality on the other. And the idea is that for you to be able to adjust one end, you have to, it affects the other, right? So if you add scope to the game, or if you increase the quality target, then you have to add people or time to compensate, or find ways to make your teams more efficient and effective at their work, or otherwise the project is not in balance. and you can tilt it the other way. So this gives you that tool to be able to try to find a balance between them, right? This is how your project should look. If it looks like this or this, you're in trouble. And this I find actually works with stakeholders who are not professional project managers or game developers. They can get behind this. They're usually not happy about it, but at least you can have a tool that you can both understand. So we covered sort of a little bit about the constraints and stakeholder management. And here I will take my first break if there's any questions about stakeholder management before we move on to a second section. No. Okay. We will go on and again, raise your hand in the system if you have questions, and we'll come back to you when I have the next break. So let's go to project management. So forget Agile, forget waterfall, whatever. Why are we doing project management? We just discussed that a little. We are trying to achieve certain goals. And those goals come from the business of what is the business goals. Then what are the product goals? What are the project goals? Why are we doing what are we doing? And what are we doing? Why and what? We are trying to answer these questions with setting good goals. Probably all seen SMART. It is not a silver bullet, but it is very valuable. Specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, timely. You probably all heard in school that this is one way to make good goals. But you want to start with specific and measurable if you want to start building a plan, a project plan to deliver something. Achievable and realistic, you can only really estimate once you have something specific enough that you can make it measurable. You can put some time estimates against it, then you can worry about the rest. So there's actually also an order into these letters in the word. So what does success look like to you? Whether you use goals, OKRs, whatever you use to set those goals, have that vision crystal clear, as clear as possible. What does success look like to you, your team, but also to your stakeholders? If you set a goal and reach it and it still doesn't satisfy your stakeholders who, for example, gave you money, then you're already set to fail to begin with. So try to understand enough of your stakeholders to make sure that success looks success to them as well. And then think about how can you measure that success. Okay, you're building a free-to-play game. What are the metrics? We're going for soft launch. What are our metrics? Are they day 1, day 7? What are we doing? And what are the numbers that we're trying to maintain? Make it more measurable as possible. And then how do we actually achieve goals? This is where the project management kicks in. That's all more about product management and leadership in general. But then when we have that, that's when project management can help. The more clear your goals are, the better project management can help. So we set the goal, we plan against the goal, and very importantly, we monitor and adjust our plan, because I have never seen anybody ship the game they originally thought they were going to. And I've never seen a schedule and a plan that didn't change. Plans are not the valuable thing. It's the planning process itself that you go through this exercise. Plans are worthless. Planning is everything, said a general once. And then you deliver, ideally, right? This is an iterative process of monitoring, adjusting your plan until you deliver, and then you celebrate. Don't forget to celebrate, because making games is hard. You need to find room to celebrate for your team. Then you set the next goal. So there's 2 levels of iteration. One is monitoring, adjusting your plan on a very short scale, and then on a longer scale, setting goals, achieving them, and setting new goals. And you can layer that like an onion, one level after another. The secondary purpose of project management is optimizing. So the first goal is to set, the first purpose is to set goals and then hit those goals and monitor and adjust along the way. The secondary is then optimizing how efficient and effective your teams are. And how do we optimize? Where in that circle do we optimize? Well, it happens in this monitor and adjust. This is where that happens. Or in Agile, we call it inspect and adapt. But it's essentially the same thing. That's, at the end of the day, that's what you do most of the time. But you cannot do unless you do the other bits first. Or you can, but you're not going to be very effective at it, right? So we talked about the purpose as well. And now, with those out of the way, we can go into project management itself. Any questions about it so far? I know I'm going quite fast, but I'm assuming most of you know these concepts. I just want to make sure that we have an even playing ground when we go to this, and since you have the recording after this, you can always come back to this and refresh this in your mind when you need that. All right. So, just for those who do not believe in Agile, let's talk a little bit about traditional project management, because this is a possibility, and I have worked in organizations where we do this. We also call it the waterfall, right? And it looks like this. You plan, you create according to the plan, you review it, and you release it, and assume everything goes according to the plan, and your design documents in the beginning were exactly perfect, and all you had to do was then fill in the blanks AE program and do the content because you were so brilliantly on point on everything, and you were like a psychic seer who could see the future, and then money comes in, right? Doesn't work that way. Even if parts of your process are like this, there's still going to be some iterative elements there, because just games are just too hard to do this. And in fact, I would argue most other projects are too hard to do this as well. That doesn't mean that this sort of exercise doesn't help build roadmaps and build sort of predictions about the future in terms of, okay, how much time do we need, how much resource we need, how much money do we think we need to raise. But if you try to then run your project like this, you're in trouble, right? So the way we think about it is that we are very plan driven. We have requirements and that constrain us, our designs and our resources and money and everything else. And then we just create a perfect plan, and we estimate the cost and schedule based on those requirements. And the plan then creates the cost and schedule estimates, and we go ahead. But word of warning, it does not work very well in games. Why? Because it's missing this inspect and adapt. Like fundamentally, psychologically, philosophically, it's refusing to accept the fact that we need this inspect and adapt, this monitor and adjust cycle, to be able to actually hit our goals. Because we're only human, we're not perfect. So that's sort of the reason why we do Agile, in a nutshell. And again, waterfall can be valuable, sort of creating these longer terms things that we can then sort of ballpark things for raising money and stuff when we don't necessarily have enough to show a full plan. Unfortunately, a lot on the business side think that when they see that's a plan, and then they expect you to execute exactly like that. And when you don't, they get frustrated, or they've been around the block enough to know, oh, game teams are never ready, so when they do that, I'll just add another 50% or 150% to their estimates because that's how it always goes. And then they think game project management is really bad. Game project management isn't necessarily bad. It's just that they are using a wrong document and they're assuming wrong things from that document. But often it's them who are forcing us as project managers to provide them that data way before we're ready to do that. All right, let's go to Agile Basics, which is the meat of this thing. Why, what, why, which, so forth. There's two schools, by the book and pick and choose. By the book is a great place to start. In reality, it's rarely practical. You can read a Scrum book, you can start doing Scrum exactly like in the book. Over time, you will realize that you need to adapt it into your environment. And you might notice that some parts of your team or your stakeholders are not comfortable with true agile, and you have to sort of change it. And I'm a much bigger believer in pick and choose. I don't follow any book like a Bible. I take some from, if you will, from Hinduism, and some from Stoic philosophy, and something from Christianity, and I mash them together to my way of running a team in a studio. And every year, every project, every studio that I go to, I learn more, and I add more tools to my toolbox. And some tools work in some environments, and in some environments they don't. So what is agile not? And this is more for the business-oriented people in the room. Agile does not mean that I can change my mind at any time. It does not mean that I can get whatever I want immediately, and I can just keep, excuse my French, jerk the team around without it having a cost, an impact. This is what we call chaos, right? This is overly agile. Even in agile, we need some structure, we need some discipline for the team to have enough stability to be able to do their job. So again, I'm a big believer in looking at what we call things is important, right? And what does agile mean? And we look at the dictionary. It's not very helpful for. I wish they would have picked another word than agile 20 plus years ago when they invented this damn thing, because the word, part of these problems come from the fact that the word means something in English. And average business person is like, oh, ChatGPT, tell me what's agile, and they get blah blah blah. I think the most useful word in this whole thing is actually feline, because at least I can show you cat pictures now. First and foremost, agile is a mindset. Forget about Scrum and everything else for a while. Agile is a mindset. You have to have an agile mindset to really get best benefit of this approach. I'm a big fan of different onions. This is what I call an agile onion. Again, not my invention, but maybe I've adopted it a little from somewhere else. And you have to have all of these layers in place to really get really good at this, right? So the mindset is about kaizen, accepting that change is good, always improving, learning organization. We should be better next week than we were this week making games. If you can get that mindset into your team and every member, that we're not just here to make a game, and we're not just here to make the game better week by week. We're here to make our teams and ourselves better day by day, week by week. And if you take that mindset and then you look back after 12-month period, you can see all those micro adjustments you made along the way to become a much more effective team. If something isn't working, experiment, try something else. Don't get hooked in and locked in your approach if it's not working. And when you experiment, you have to accept that some of those experiments might make things worse. And then you just say, okay, that didn't work, so let's try something else, right? Agile values are important. Many people read the Agile Manifesto and the Agile Manifesto when they start Agile, and then they forget about them. But actually, it's good to come back to them every now and then, because they're more valuable when you get experienced in this, and because it's more like a philosophical thing. It's never wrong, you know. Kind of like 10 Commandments is never wrong. It's never good to do things to other person's cows or whatever those say. Similarly, Agile Manifesto will always stay relevant. It'll always stay valuable. The 12 principles underneath it also will always stay valuable, and are again going to give you more value long term than any individual process or practice. So nail down the manifesto and the principles and the overall Kaizen mindset, and you're already quite far there, no matter what practice you use. There are a lot of different practices, Scrum, Kanban, etc. These really valuable, and they're sort of a shortcut. You don't have to reinvent the wheel, because there's a lot of wheels that other people had invented, and you can put them together to formulate your package of processes and practices you're going to use. And underneath that, there's actual concrete tools and processes. So very often people jump here, and should we use Jira or Trello, and how should we do this, the stand-ups and that. unless you get all the other layers right first, you're optimizing the wrong thing. And I can tell you a lot about all of these other layers, but I am not the best person to tell you how to adjust your Jira to do this the best, or how to exactly use Trello. In fact, in my work running large teams and coaching and mentoring and consulting with studios, I haven't actually physically used any project management software for many years. I've been in meetings where it's been used. I've been giving people advice how to do it, but I have other people who are doing that level detail thing because of the size and complexity of things that I'm dealing with today. So the key to success isn't necessarily the Jira, the Trello choice. It's all the other levels before it. The Jira and Trello are then the final adjustment on optimization there. So it goes from very intangible to very concrete. But you have to accept that the most intangible, they're the least visible in the day to day, but they're actually underneath it. They're behind the scenes, and they're the most powerful ways you have to really make your team working. Uh, and the concrete things are the most visible, but they're actually the least powerful. You can make the best Jira setup in the world. If you don't have the other layers, you're not really getting the benefit of Agile. And to me, it's not about are you doing Agile right or not. It's that you get the benefit of Agile. That's the point. So try to be Agile rather than doing Agile, right? And these things are not so relevant because you're all small startup teams. But I would say that all of this is still easy for you to put in place because you don't have a long history of bad structure in your company. You don't have bureaucracy and you don't have command and control yet, I hope. But if you can build all of these layers, then you're on your way to building a learning organization. And that's ultimately what's going to make you successful. Because let's face it, for most of us, the first game we make as a company will fail. The point is, do we have enough bandwidth then to make a second game and a third game? And are we getting better as an organization in making games so that we use our time and our resources wisely to ultimately be successful? And if it's not the first startup, then maybe it's our second or third startup. That's also a thing that in Finland we see an entrepreneur with a bankruptcy in his record as a failure. And I love the US mindset where it is like, okay, well, they're now on level 2 on entrepreneurship because, they have one level behind them, kind of like in D&D, they're leveling up. So, Agile Manifesto. I'm not going to run through this because of lack of time, but I urge you to look through the Agile Manifesto. Urge you to look through the 12 principles and put them on the wall somewhere where you're working in your home. They make for great decorations and remind you. So let's jump to the why Agile. So in software development companies, when Agile was introduced, it was about reduction of process bureaucracy because there's a lot of fancy development methods that developed over time. As software and software teams became more and more increasingly complex and larger, they started adding more and more complexity into the way they were working. And you have to remember, some of these organizations have thousands of people, right? And so to them, Agile is about reducing that bureaucracy. In my experience, when I come to a game studio and we start introducing Agile, we actually are reducing chaos, not process. And we're not usually reducing bureaucracy, we're usually reducing chaos because in large software companies, they have too much process. In game industry, we tend to have the opposite problem where we're too free-form artists and programmers going by the vibe and, day to day. And so we have to add enough framework to do things, right? You remember this, well, when we compare it to Agile, it's a much more iterative approach, right? Which means if we look at how does waterfall value this, in Agile, we flip it the upside down, right? The cost and the schedule is usually the constraints. And then we estimate the features. So we are value and vision driven, right? Which should, if you can explain it to your business owners as well, should be much more meaningful to them as well. Because, okay, how much money do we have? How much resources do we have? How much time do we have? Let's make the best damn thing we can do. in that time and try to figure out how can we deliver as much value to our stakeholders, whether they are the gamers and players and the investors, with the constraints that we have. And then that means that the exact feature set, content set, and the quality of all of those has to be more flexible. Because we can't lock everything down. We have to have this seesaw and ability to move that around. So what does that mean in terms of risk management? In waterfall, all the risk is towards the end because we have this plan and we build it and then we test it in the end and it either worked or not. In Agile, we try to get a minimum version of things done as early as possible so that we can start testing it, whether that's internally, whether that's with test cloud or something, or actually going to a soft launch. It's all about reducing the risk early, addressing the risky things first, getting testing data on them, and try to be data driven about are we going in the right way or not. Because if we're not, let's adjust it earlier instead of wasting all of that money, right? All of that money spent between the red line and the blue line is a potential saving, right? Any questions on that, or am I preaching to the choir about why Agile is awesome? Okay. Silence. I can see we have a lot of Finns in the audience. If we had an international audience, we would have more questions. So which Agile? Which Agile process we should use? Well, this is just a non-comprehensive list of all the Agile processes out there, right? There is a ton. And I can't say I'm expert in all of them. In fact, I think this is part of the problem with modern Agile because people have been building business models around this. So then they're developing their own versions of Agile and they're trying to sell it. They're trying to sell you tools for it, coaching for it, certification training for it. And for people like me, trainer certifications. Hey, would you like to become a certified Scrum trainer so you can teach Scrum to others? But if I then do certified Scrum training, then I have to go buy the book. I can no longer be pick and choose. I have to go buy the book. And that's something I find frustrating in some of the Agile training myself. So when I'm running a larger company studio, I like to have internal experts who know the process, who will then custom tailor the training for our teams so that we're saying, hey, this is our flavor of Scrum. This is how we're doing things, and here's why, instead of just the buy the book thing. Uh, uh, but if we focus, these are sort of the things that I know something more about, and I'm actually certified in multiple Scrum things. I have worked a lot with Kanban. I'm also a certified Nexus person. Less and Safe, they're also popular in the game industry, but I know them in theory, but I haven't used them in practice. So a lot of the stuff that will come from me will come from Scrum, Kanban, and Nexus. So if you're familiar with those, then we'll get along great. Lean is also an interesting bit, and there's a great book on Lean that is old but good, and I suggest you read it Toyota Way. Toyota car manufacturing production pipelines used the Lean method to really become, at one time, the biggest and most powerful car manufacturer in the world. Of course, now it's Tesla. Well, not the biggest, but the most powerful. But let's see how long that goes with Elon Musk going not just slightly but greatly mad lately. Hopefully he doesn't listen to this podcast or whatever recording this is. So key principles from Lean: eliminate waste. Anything that doesn't add value to the customer is waste. How can we get rid of it, including documentation and everything else? But documentation also has value. Optimize the workflow through continuous improvement. That Kaizen mindset comes out there as well. Focus on delivering value to the customers as quickly and efficiently as possible. How can we get it quicker? Deliver value, eliminate waste, do it quick, and optimize through continuous improvement. That's sort of nutshell Lean principles and philosophy, the way I look at it. But I invite you to the producer types in the room to read that book. It's very enlightening. In terms of a philosophy of thing. Of course, you're not going to be building robots and paint stations and aluminum bending machines. So Lean is a philosophy, right? Kanban is a lean method. So it's not actually an agile method, it's a lean method. But lean and agile, they're almost the same thing, but it's a bit of potato. But it's a very valuable method. Okay. I'm not going to talk to you today about extreme programming or Scrum of Scrums or many of these other things. Um, we can go into them later in one-on-ones and other things if some people are really, really interested. We're also not going to talk about Less, Nexus, and Safe today because they're scaled agile approaches. But we are going to talk a little bit more about Scrum and Kanban today. Questions? No questions. Can somebody give me a thumbs up or a heart or something so I know you guys are alive? No, nothing. There you go. There you go. Now I feel better. Good. I'm not preaching to the wall. There's actually people behind those avatars. So I said here that we have sort of lean, and then we have agile and scaled agile. When I say agile versus scaled agile, I mean short-term and small teams. If it's large teams or long-term, then we're starting talking about scaled agile. But you cannot do scaled agile well unless you know how to do agile first. And so where we are today and where I think most of your teams are today, I want to make sure that you get the short-term agile right, you get to practice it, you get your team efficiency machine going, and you start producing the game and the builds of the game. Then later down the line, we can worry about the long-term planning more. Because if I start going into all the concepts of how do you do long-term planning, and we don't make sure that you guys know this and you've done multiple cycles of this, you will ultimately just won't be able to use it. It's like you've ever only driven automatic transmission on and give you a car with manual transmission and you'll just destroy my beautiful Ferrari. So, with great tools comes great responsibility. So we'll go back into that in future lectures. When we are talking about non-scaled agile, the ideal team size is 7 plus minus 2. Now, I could give you 1 hour lecture where that number comes from. But there are multiple factors behind it, many of them to do with human psychology. So we can go into that if you want, but for now, to save time, I will just show you one image to explain it, okay? So many of you have probably seen this. This is giving you a visualization of how many different interconnecting, assuming that we have a unified team where everybody's equal and there's no managers and everybody's talking to everybody else in the team, how many communication lines does that team have? And you can see how the amount of lines grows exponentially compared to the team size. So when I say 7 plus minus 2, that's the one surrounded in green. So 3 to 4 people is probably so small that many of the agile practices isn't even needed, especially if they sit in one room physically working together every day. They can be even more agile than many of the agile practices. But when you have a team between 5 and 9 people, those communication lines start to get complicated, and you will need more help to manage that communication so that everybody's actually on the same page. We say in Finnish, puhalletaan yhteen hiileen. We are all blowing on the same coal. I don't know if it makes any sense in English, but I think most of you are Finnish, so you will understand. If not, then ask your Finnish teammates and they will explain to you what that metaphor means. But then you start going beyond 9 and you can see it just starts getting crazy. And I can tell you, if you try to run teams much larger than that, using just agile and not scaled agile and not multiple teams, it's gonna get really complicated really fast. And you will have disgruntled teammates because they don't feel that they know what's going on. They don't feel included in the process. So actually, counterintuitively, then starting to break your team into more than one team after you reach 9, somewhere between 9 and 15, you should break it to 2 teams. But then you cannot use pure agile. You cannot use pure Scrum because those basic agile processes do not tell you anything about how to run two teams. It's all about running one team. For the mathematically oriented in the room, that's the formula for that number, right? So you can just mathematically calculate it for any team size. The ideal planning window, meaning how long do we want to plan for in Agile without scaling, is one iteration. Whether that iteration is 1 week or 1 day or 2 weeks, which is the most usual one, or a month. Whatever your iteration length is, you're planning one iteration, you're executing on one iteration, and then you're replanning. If you want to plan anything longer than that, you actually need scaled agile practices for that, because pure agile doesn't give you an answer for that. You can, of course, invent your own, but then you're inventing your own scaled agile practice. Okay, you're like, okay, Jay, you're throwing us project management jargon. What the hell is the planning window? I'm getting bored with all of this. Well, you asked for it. You're going to get another onion chart. I told you earlier I like onions. Natural cycles. This is how us humans live. Why? Because this is how the world around us operate when we observe it. There's a day cycle. The sun comes up and it goes down, except in the winter and summer in Finland. But, at least if you live on the equator, it goes up and down quite regularly. Then we form it into a week. We will form that week into a month, and that month into a quarter in terms of business terms, but also there's 4 seasons, at least in some countries. In some countries, they're not exactly 3 months, but in theory, the 12-month calendar is broken into 4 3-month seasons, which correspond to the four. I found this on the web for the 12-month calendar. Wow. Sorry about that. That was Siri on my iPad thinking I'm talking to it. I guess season and series sound same. So we break the year into quarters in business terms often. Business people love talking about quarter one profits and da da da. So we should use that because it's a natural cycle. Year is also a natural cycle. A 12-month cycle is a very natural cycle. So we map our process cycles to these cycles. And we have sort of yearly plans, quarterly plans, release plans, sprint planning, and dailies. But I'm not going to go into all of this detail because you're not in a large corporation, so you don't have to please your executive level and things like that. But if we take that into the window idea, when we're talking about short-term windows, and remember, basic agile only answers to short-term windows. Long-term windows, basic agile can help you there. It's the weekly and daily cycles that we're focused on. Of course, weeks turn into months and so forth. So at the weekly cycle, we have the iteration, whether that's 1 week, 2 week, 3 week, 4 week, whatever. I would not go lower than 1 week cycle unless you're working on some hyper casual games, maybe, who have to release the whole game in a week or something. You do your sprint planning, and you have to do your backlog grooming. I'm sorry, I used the word grooming. I know some people might find it triggering because of the word it's associated these days in internet grooming, but backlog maintenance would be another word, where you actually taking care of your backlog. Backlog is like a garden. You can't just plant your flowers once and they will be good to go. You have to give them nourishment and talk to them and water and love and sunlight so that your backlog stays in good shape. Otherwise, your sprint planning becomes really, really hard if you don't maintain your thing. So during every single iteration, you should do at least one backlog grooming session and one sprint planning session. And then dailies. Dailies are really valuable. Maybe you don't want to do them dailies. Maybe you do them 3 times a week or 2 times a week. But if you don't talk regularly during the iteration, how do you make sure that you guys are in sync and you're all still believing that you're going to be hitting that iteration? If you don't need dailies, then are you really a team working on things, or are you individuals all working on your own little pieces of the game? Don't expect a very coherent product if you're all working in your silos at home and only talk once every 2 weeks. You will lose a lot of time and effort wasted that way. So, the very most basic process that I can give you how to run the short-term thing, and if you know Scrum, this will look very familiar to you. You are creating a new build of the game on a regular basis. And you regularly sync on what you're doing. So you have regular communication. Now, that's the very basic you're doing. And you could do this on a daily cycle, do the daily build, think, what do we do next day? Build a new build, think, what do we do next day? If you're in a really iterative phase of the project, this might be all you need. Like you're prototyping really quick iteration, then forget about everything else. Just do this. Meet, plan a new sprint, build a new plan a new cycle, build a new build, play test the build, and rinse and repeat until you find things. But at some point, that's just going to become too hectic because now you need to make this piece of art or something that's going to take you a week or 2 weeks to make, or even longer. And you need to slow the pace down to not go crazy. That's when you want to introduce an iteration. So instead of going from a very, very short cycle, you say, okay, let's do a sprint. How 1 week, 2 weeks, something. You plan that sprint planning. And I know there's a misspelling, but I've been too lazy to fix it. Sorry about that. If you're OCD like me, that's going to trigger you. What I would then recommend you add to that is review. So you do a more formal review where you play test the sprint results. You look at what did we get done? What do we like? What do we don't like? What do we need to change? How does that affect our backlog? Do we still have the right things in the backlog as next priorities? No, actually, we need to go back and redo this or whatever. On top of that, you also want to review your project management data. What goals did we set for ourselves? We set these goals. Okay, which ones we accomplished? We accomplished this one, we accomplished this one. That's not fully done, so we need to come back to it. Do we want to continue on that, or do we put it on the backlog and focus on something else? We did this, but it wasn't good enough. We have to redo it. So let's plan another milestone for this one. And maybe we continue with these two in the next sprint, or maybe we pick something completely new from the backlog. We can change that. We don't have to continue this, but that's a inspect. This is the inspect and adapt cycle, right? So then it goes back to planning again. So you inspect your build in the review and you adapt your plans to reality, because remember, reality hits you in the face and all your plans go out the window because they're all wrong, because you were not super omniscient ability to see the future. So then you replan and you maintain your backlog. What I also recommend you then add is a retrospective. Why? Because this first cycle is about improving the game. The retro, you can think of a cycle of improving how we work. Okay, what did we like? What did we did not like? What's the at least one challenge? You should always try to challenge at least one thing that we can do better in the next cycle. Well, we weren't always on time in our dailies. Okay, let's try to be on time. Or the 8 o'clock morning dailies don't work for me because I'm a night owl. Let's run them at 10 o'clock instead. Or hey, we ran the dailies only 3 times a week. That didn't work. Let's try 4 times a week. Keep adjusting and learning and experimenting. How can you become better as a team? And then formalize your things. Just the fact that your daily stand-up is a really good format. You don't have to physically stand up, but it helps because it keeps it short, right? That's why we stand up. You can do it online as well. Formalize it. What are you going through? Scrum gives you a basic formula for it, but you can invent your own formulas as well, how you do your daily stand-up. And then you want to add that grooming. So between planning and review, you have to have, I believe, a meeting where you look at your backlog and you make sure that it's still in shape. Because that's a third inspect and adapt cycle. So you have the review, sprint planning, inspect and adapt cycle, which is about making the game. You have the grooming, inspect and adapt cycle, which is maintaining your plan and backlog to keep your plannings easier. Because if you don't have a good backlog, then planning becomes a really long thing. Like one of the anti-patterns is you run a 2-week sprint, but you end up spending 1 day in review and retro and another day in sprint planning. That's 2 days out of 10. That's 20% of your work time. You should try to get all of these done in as fast time as possible. I can't tell you what the right number is, but I can tell you that if you're spending 2 days out of 10, it's 20% of your work. And you have to seriously ask, are we good enough at this? Do we have to get better at this? And the key to me is that your backlog is in shape, everything gets faster. And backlog grooming is something that a lot of it the producer can do without the team, but some parts of it, like estimates and other things, the team should be part of as well. So these are the steps: regular communication, planning each iteration, inspecting the progress, adapting plans to reality, improving our ways of working, formalizing things, and maintaining the long-term plan. If you can do these steps, then you're on your way to being able to run your team in 2-week cycles and increase your efficiency over time and getting better and better and better at it. So when we then next time talk, we can start adding longer term layers on top of it. But if you don't get good at this, then it's like building a skyscraper on bad foundation, and you're going to struggle with the long term planning as well. And by the way, this is called Scrum, if you're not aware. So there, you could have paid money and spent 2 days in training and get certified on it. And of course, you're going to get much deeper understanding of it. But that's the basics of it to get going if you never even heard of Scrum. And this is what your project then looks like. You chain one of these after another over time to keep building your game and keep improving yourselves, right? Any questions at this point? One hand up. Maria. No requests. Okay. Maria didn't have a question anymore. Did I already answer it?
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Yes. Okay. Yeah. How do you? What's kind of the minimum time frame you should think about iteration? Because we're not doing this every day, so maybe 2-week sprint might be the way to do this. But is there like minimum of 4 hours a week, and do you want still to do the dailies like every day, or is it better to do like, okay, let's work on these 2 days and then do the dailies then?
Well, obviously, if you had a daily on Monday and nobody's worked and done anything for the game before Thursday, it's the next day somebody's going to do something. There's no point in having a daily on Tuesday and Wednesday because it's like, oh, nothing has changed. Okay. So figure out what your cycle is if you're not working full time on the game and match your thing to that. The length of the iteration, and by the way, these are really good questions. Thank you. The length of the iteration is a hotly debated topic amongst developers. Developers love to debate this, but I would think of it from two lenses. One is, how long do we think our plan is going to remain stable and not change, right? Let's assume that we are running a month-long iteration. And 2 weeks into the iteration, the product manager comes in. I have new data. The data shows we should be doing this feature. I want to do this. And you're like, thank you, Mr. Product Manager. I would remind you, we're in the middle of a 1-month iteration. We are not going to change the goals for the team during this iteration because that would disrupt the effective workflow of the team. The earliest we can start work on it is at this date. And if they're fine with that, then that's still okay from this lens point of view. But if they're like, no, I really need you to start, could you squeeze it into the sprint? If you start getting that you change the sprint goals during the sprint, then your sprint is too long and your stakeholders can't deal with it, make it shorter. If the designer comes up with new ideas he wants to try immediately, like if the goal is like iterate on this, then fine, let's iterate on it. That's part of the goal. But if the goal is like the programmer needs to program this based on the design document that was agreed at the beginning of the sprint, then the designer cannot go and change that design document during it because it's going to make the programmer's work inefficient. So you be very careful what your goals are when you set them. So that's one. How long can stakeholders wait for you to change direction and goals? The other side of it is the overhead, right? Very often studios complain that, oh, this 2-week iteration, it's too much overhead. We find it too hard. And the really nasty trick that us agile practitioners love to do is, well, we give them 1-week iteration. We make it even more painful. So they will have to learn how to get better at the planning and the review to reduce the overhead. And then when you move back to 2 weeks, it feels good. So if you find out that you're using 20-25% of your time on all of these things that make you iterate, keep the iteration going, then that's probably too much, right? Like in a 2-week iteration, when I started in a new company, it usually takes 2 days. I try to squeeze it to day and a half, and then ultimately I want to try and squeeze it to 1 day. So in 1 day we could do review and planning and review, retro. Sorry. In the following day, if I have multiple teams, I could then go and collect all the retros from all the teams and deal with leads. But most of the team would then be already implementing the thing. So those are the two factors. How long can the stakeholders wait until we change goals? And how much overhead does the process add to the work? So those are the two goals. One of them is telling you to push things longer, so the relative overhead becomes smaller. But one of them is asking you to make it shorter, so that we can be more reactive to requests coming from business side, designers, whoever it's coming from. And so these are the aspects. There's something else in my mind that I forget. Oh, pro tip. Personally, I like to run sprints Wednesday to Wednesday, not Monday to Friday. Why? Because the work can easily then flow into weekend. And if you're doing this as a side job on top of your normal job, maybe that's okay. The other problem is if we do reviews on Fridays and then we do planning on Monday, it just disrupts things. So I like that the people can have their weekend, then they come in on Monday. Okay, we have a couple of days left of the sprint. Now we're working hard to get it done. Then we do the planning and reviews and everything in the middle of the week, and then we get the sprint going again, and then we go into weekend. The other reason is a lot of people take longer weekends. You want to take a Monday or Friday off. Well, if you're running your key synchronization points in the team on those days, then that's not good. Of course, in your case, if somebody's working at his day job every Wednesday, then maybe Wednesday is not a good for day. Maybe Tuesday or Thursday is better day for you. So think about that as well. How does it fit into your rhythm, where you start and end your sprints?
Thank you.
All right, let's move forward. So when you look at agile terminology, we call these ceremonies, right? Um, ceremony is anything that we do together in a sort of formalized, agreed format, and that's why we call it ceremony. You could also call it a meeting, but those are not necessarily meetings because they're about doing something that could take another form than meeting everybody together. The other key aspects to support. So in general, when you build your processes, there's two aspects to them. There's the ceremonies and processes that you do. Process is just a defined way of doing things that makes it easier to do a repeatable task more effectively and without wasting time. Ceremonies are the meetings and other communication points where people are formally getting together in certain format. And then you have artifacts. And the minimal artifacts you would like to have is your product backlog, your sprint planning product increment. So you take a part of your backlog and you think, okay, we think based on our estimate, this fits in one sprint. Let's now try to execute it. That's now our sprint backlog. We use a burn down chart or something else to follow progress and adjust along the way. Try to make our best efforts in hitting the goal. And there's a lot of pro tips to go more advanced how you do that. In grooming, during the thing, you go back to your product backlog and you maintain that product backlog. And in here, you will need your sprint review and retrospective artifacts. You will generate some notes and action points from those. And then, of course, the most important artifact, which is the game, which will hopefully launch into money orbit like a space shuttle. All right. So what is Scrum ideal for? It's ideal for iterative, explorative work, feature development, and cross-discipline teams. It is not ideal for content pipelines where you have to create 20 characters 3D animation, all of it. And it's also not ideal for long-term planning. That's beyond the discussion today. And it's not ideal for large teams. That's where you need scaled agile, which, spoiler alert, is often a scaled version of Scrum, where you build Scrums together. So that is 1 hour. If we have a lot of questions, we can move into Q&A. Those who have to leave, thank you. If there's not questions, then I can continue talking a little bit longer on this topic. There's a question. Knowing there's no one methodology over others, what would you consider those key signs that one methodology could work over others? I know there's at least a similarity factor to the ongoing process and its change, but let's say that no one was able to explain anything about their project management. What are the key questions to ask? Right. Yeah. So that is a complex question, but let me answer it this way, right? So the primary purpose is to achieve goals, right? So you start with, what was our goal again? Did we meet that goal? Why did we not meet that goal? What can we do in the future to meet that goal? That's the primary thing. And no matter what method you use, that should be the focus. The other focus is to optimize. How could we make the way we work better so we could get more shit done? Right? We can maybe talk later in more detail about what you mean by your question. But in general, if the team cannot hit their goals, or if they don't know what their goals are, then they're not running a good process. And again, don't try to reinvent the wheel when there's proven methods that you could utilize. But also don't be afraid to adjust those things to your team's needs. But there is a risk. Sorry, programmers, I don't mean any insult, but the most common anti-pattern I see is that you teach somebody using Scrum, and the first thing some programmer goes like, "Oh, hey, we could optimize these dailies. Instead of dailies, why don't we have a Slack channel or Discord channel where we can once a day uh, send a Slack message instead of going into a daily and say, this is what I did yesterday and this is what I'm going to do today, and I have no impediments, like a robot who needs oil change. I can just put that in the Slack channel. Well, I can guarantee you what will happen. So everybody's like, oh yeah, let's do that. Everybody starts putting those messages. Nobody will read them. And then after that, people will stop putting those messages in that Slack channel. And over time, you realize that communication, that staying in sync, starts to disappear, and you start to struggle hitting your goals, let alone optimizing your teamwork. Because it's not about optimizing one programmer's programming bandwidth, unless they're truly the bottleneck of the team, but optimizing your whole as a team, your ability to hit your goals as a team, your ability to make the game together. Because at the end of the day, if the code is perfect and all the lines of code are written, but there's no design on top of it, there's no art on top of it, nobody can play, nobody can do any of that other stuff, then you're not reaching the goals of making the game. So be very careful of optimizing the wrong thing. You provided the perfect answer. It boils down to that. Goals optimize. Okay, cool. All right. What else do we have time for? I will very quickly show you Kanban. And this is so short that if you're not, I give you a warning. Most studios that are using Kanban are not using Kanban because they don't understand Kanban deeply enough. It's much harder concept to understand than Scrum. I'll try to make it simple, but if this is interest to you and it goes above your understanding, then we can come back to it in our one-on-ones and I can explain more, but we are running over time. So, what is Kanban? Kanban is a signboard or a billboard in Japanese language, or I don't speak Japanese, but that's what I've been told. If you read that Toyota book, they talk about Kanban there as well. Kanban in software development context and game development context is ideal for content pipeline and for predictable work. Okay, we know how to make this character. Now we have to make 20 more characters like it in the same technical and art style. And it's great at optimizing throughput. How can we become more efficient at generating all of these characters? It is not ideal for iterative explorative work, and it's not ideal for feature development. And the interesting bit about this is it's pretty much a perfect match to Scrum, right? And you can do Scrum and Kanban in parallel in the same project. And no, please don't call it Scrumban. That's in its own process and yeah, not my favorite thing. So Scrum is great at concept phase when you're trying to figure out the concept of the game. It's also great at the pre-production phase when you're still exploring the game more deeply. It's great for cross-discipline feature teams, for prototyping, for art concepting, feature development in cross-discipline teams. Kanban is great for production phase and live phase for the content pipeline side. So often you can say that if it's cross-discipline or if it involves programmers, Scrum is probably better. When it involves mainly art and content teams, but sometimes some live operation code teams, Kanban is a better tool. Okay, so these two tools will give you, I would say, 75-80% of the power you need to run short-term agile. Let me quickly run you through what does an actual Kanban implementation look like. And you can do this in many tools. Some people call it a Kanban board, but it doesn't provide all of these options. Then you deal with what you have. But if nothing else, you can make this in Miro or some other digital whiteboard, and you can have all of these tools available, no matter what your project management tool is. But of course, ideally, project management tool would do everything we need. But unfortunately, I can tell you with 20 plus years of experience, there is no perfect project management tool. They all suck in different ways, and we just have to deal with it.